good night, good evening, depending on what time it is, wherever you are in the world. This is me reading the first 5 pages for real this time of Brother Reginald Mayberry's paper Syncretism, a means and method for accurately translating Kemet, Kemetiyu, and Kem. Reginald A. Mayberry, independent scholar, reggie.mayberry@gmail.com. This article is a reflection of the presentation offered at the 2019 Association for Classical African Civilization, or ASCAC, conference, where the origins and meanings of the word Kemet has a footnote there, which we'll get to later, was debated. This examination seeks to identify syncretism as a proposed and superior method of interpreting ancient texts, specifically the Medu Neter. Therefore, syncretism affords a more accurate and a more accurate understanding of the ancient texts of the Cometiyu. More specifically, the aim and objective of this article is to examine the origins of the ancient Egyptian word Kemet to highlight and establish its relationship with both the black cattle and the sacred black people that ancients referred to. This paper will discuss Kemet, parentheses here KM, Kem, KMT is Kemet, and KMT.T YW Kemetiyu glyphs with this transliteration. So you see Kem here. This is really the Kem glyph. This is just what they call a phonetic completion. So just let you know to pronounce the M at the end. This is Kemet. You see the Kem with the T and the people here equals the Negroes literally. Then you have Kemetiyu, the Negroes. First, what is the meaning of Kemet? Is that it's the term related to black and people. Oh, is the term related to black and people at all? And why is Kemet referred to as simply the black land by Western/European scholars? Is the meaning of Kemet important to Pan-Africanist thinking and scholarship? To properly approach these research questions, I will incorporate the following qualitative research methodologies: observation of ancient cultural and historical primary materials, and narrative discourse analysis of primary and secondary data source, where archival collection and study. It must be noted that European scholars are in the business of observation and creating narratives and discourse to give a Eurocentric and colonial meaning to Africa, its ancient civilizations and people, for the purpose of providing intellectual tools for the maintenance of their worldview and hegemony. African people should engage in the business of speaking in the first person about their culture and peoples with intellectual integrity and honesty. Adaptation of this practice and level of agency by African people globally would establish this important step in the effort to unite a continent divided by the European invasion and infestation of the European worldview currently plagued by the African mind and heart. Currently plaguing the African mind and heart, therefore, African scholars have the obligation to understand completely African philosophy and create an economic, political, and cultural reality for sustainable Africa. To revisit the genealogy of intellectual thought that advanced and established the concept of Kemet as black, I must I must mention Senegalese intellect and scholar Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop and Dr. Theophile Obanga. Diop and Obanga will collectively challenge the world in what is known as the Cairo Symposium. There's a footnote again to debate the peopling of the Nile Valley. The outcome has a major. The outcome was a major victory for African people, African unity, and Pan Africanism in the scholarly debate to establish Kemet as a black African nation and the central slash focal point of a classical African civilization. This was the triumph of the work of Alain Diop and his presence Afrique in the Cairo Symposium. There were two major outcomes. The peopling of the Nile Valley was established to be African, meaning that humanity is in fact indigenous to the continent of Africa and migrated from the interior slash within of the African continent, not outside. Second, Dia and Obanga argue convincingly using Egyptian grammar that the ancient Egyptian Cometiyu called themselves black. Another footnote. Since the Cairo Symposium, African scholars have been vigorously studying ancient Kemet to fill in the gaps in the intellectual discourse and debate. This has created an explosion in the university and scholarly world. In the Americas, specifically the United States, Dr. John Henry Clark stands out as a facilitator for the international linkage In 1968, Dr. Clark and several colleagues left the African Studies Association and formed the African Heritage Studies Association, founded dozens of organizations, cultural, social, political, educational, began popping up across the United States, interlinking with each other. Dr. Clark pushed his network of scholars to be Pan-Africanist and act as an international community in 1975. The, the National Council for Black Studies was formed, giving African scholars more resources and advancing the process of breaking with the European hegemony in education. As such, building on previous scholarship, the research method, design, and strategy applied here to establish a relationship between Chem, Black land, and people decisively will be decisive will be descriptively explanatory and comparative in the form of syncretism as it relates to ancient Kemet civilization and ideas while examining, finding, and interpreting the transliterated graphemes Kemet, Kemetiu, and Kem in context of the sentences they exist. What is syncretism? Many scholars have written on this analysis. I will use the following from Richard Gordon for it applies to ancient Egypt. Quote, its new meaning was summarized by Andrew Lang in relation to Egypt in 1887. The word denotes process whereby various god names and god natures are mingled so as to unite the creeds of different nomes and provinces, but the obscurity of the process at work has meant that the term's real value lies in precision. Two basic types are to be distinguished in the ancient world, internal and contact, end quote. In, internal synchronism is typical of ancient Egypt and Vedic religion as much the result of popular piety as of temple theology. Each god appears in a variety of forms and functions, forms, names, and epithets, diversity, and intermingle with boundless energies. Gods often in tribes coexist or cohabitate within one another, remaining separate at the level of the cult. And there's another footnote. Modern scholars of ancient Egypt have employed a degree of dishonesty as they have hidden important elements of ancient Egyptian religious thought as they promote their version of Egyptian philosophy. This examination will limit the complex system of ancient Egypt civilization. Henceforth, Kemet civilization were not confusing to focus on the syncretism of black cattle Kemet and its probable relations to the meaning of the civilization. Kemet civilization, like other African civilizations, had deities, divine ruler concepts, sacred animals, principles, religious art, and architecture, vocabulary, and literature in their images. Kemetic civilization is unique in that it was among the first two civilizations that began writing and recording the earliest of the civilization's finds. Gunther Dreyer, and another footnote, so with the archaeology of paintings, drawings, architecture, we have writing to better understand what would usually be symbolic. The syncretism of the ancient Egyptian ruler, people as people as black with black coat animals will continue through the decline of ancient Egypt into the invasion periods, the Meroe period up until the last pharaoh. The book The Roots of Nubian Christianity uncovered the triumph of the last pharaoh provides evidence of the end of pharaonic Kemet. Another footnote. As understanding of syncretism provides in-depth knowledge of ancient Kemet civilization and its philosophies, the more one knows, the more one can glean. Dr. James S. Mbidi, in the introduction to this classic book, says, and I quote, Africans are notoriously religious, and each people has its own religious system with a set of beliefs and practices. Religion permeates all departments of life to the degree and so fully that it is not easy or always possible to isolate it. A study of these religious systems is therefore ultimately a study of the people themselves and all complexities of both traditional and modern life. That's a footnote. Dr. Jacob Carruthers began his first chapter called Orientation and Problems In the redemption of ancient Egypt, another footnote with a statement from Magameli Mabona, he states, I quote, but to arrive at the proper estimation of the cultural values of any society is necessary to grasp first the philosophy, or rather the metaphysical attitude which underlies these values. History and architecture shows that there has been in Africa a civilization which extends from Egypt to Angola, from Timbuktu to Zimbabwe. This civilization consisted of a complex of cultures which in their structure shows a marvelous form and thematic uniformity to be observed in their literature and mythologies. The counter-arguments and analysis presented in the 2019 ASCAC conference with prior debates indicated that those arguing that Kemet and Kemetiu meant something other than having the root black did so as a result of not analyzing the text/word in the context of the sentences in which they were born. Therefore, the conclusions were highly unscientific and incorrect, and at worst, the arguments were speculative. In short, the methodology utilized and presented here will analyze the graphemes and transliterations of Kemet and Kemetiu from the context of the sentences that they originated. They will put into context. In essence, they will put into context syncretism. Syncretism is applied to support the arguments and supply references in order for the reader to understand the arguments. The case of Kemet. Diab's argument on the subject of Kemet in the UNESCO Symposium in Cairo was that the following: the Egyptians had only one term to designate themselves, Kemet, the Negroes, literally. This was the strongest term existing in the Pharaonic term to indicate blackness. It is accordingly written with a hieroglyphic representation, a length of wood charred at the end, and not crocodile scales. This word is the etymological origin of the well-known root comet, which has proliferated in the modern anthropological literature. As another footnote. To support their position, pictured here is the primary pyramid of Unas, the first recorded pyramid text where the king Unas uses Kemen Kemen. Ma Ahat Unas Pen Ma'ab Ab We Tepeth Smawi and Tut Is Sakem Sikem Sa Sikemet Mesu Sit Bak Sinku Fed Wapet. See, this Una stands among you. Two horns are on his head, like two wild bulls, for you are indeed the black ram, son of a black sheep, born of a bright sheep, suckled by four sheep mothers. So this is the transliteration, this is the translation. The text can be interpreted as a passage of authority. The king Unas is asserting that he is a black ram born with two horns like wild bulls, son of a black sheep, born of a bright sheep. Here, black ram is Sakem, and black sheep is Sitkemet. We must keep in mind this is a statement of syncretism, and in the beliefs of ancient Kemet civilization, this relationship existed. This relationship is not unique to the way other religious figures are introduced in texts. A familiar example of this exists in the Bible. The hair on his head was white like wool and white as snow. White as snow. And his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like brass glowing in a furnace. And his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. That's another footnote, number 50. For the ancient Kemet civilization, the description of other divine kings following the same tradition as Unas. This statement in the language of the ancient Egyptian is the following. Example 11 from Sucker, part 246, S252B and C. And Tut is Si Kem, Sa Sit Kemet, Mesu Sit, Bek, Bekta Senek, Waf Fedu, Wepet, for you are the black ram, son of a black ewe, that a bright ewe bore and four sheep. Suckle. The source of this last iteration is the Hieratic Demotic in Greek Studies, a text edition of Making Many Books, There Is No End. Fecht Chickriff in honor of Spen P. Belling. That's another one. The author says this passage survived in later Egyptian funerary literature, making an appearance a millennium or thereabouts later in the Book of the Dead, henceforth BD spelled 177. The author also included this source to make the point that this tradition continued. Example 12, Book of the Dead 177, papyrus of Geth Session. And Tut is Sir, Kem Sir, Sir, Sir Kemet, Missy N, Shri Tib Baket, Sen, Sen Ku, M, Ifdet, Wepi, for you are the black ram, son of a black ewe, that a bright sheep bore and a suckled at the breast of four sheep. So we're going on to this will be the last page that I will read right here once we get to the end of this. Certainly one can make an argument that this Kemen Kemen has nothing to do with the origins and meanings of the people of ancient Egypt. However, they must disqualify this long tradition of the king or ruler of this civilization stating that he was something other than a black ram or bull in the early dynasties. In other words, it would be impossible to say that Kemen Kemen have nothing to do with the peoples of ancient Egypt in color or in their animal counterpart. New and young linguists, thinkers such as Netanel, makes the argument in linguistics and Kemen Kemen being black people directly, and has argued this with linguistics. It is well settled that ancient Egyptian civilization was a continuous civilization of culture, ritual, rulership, ideas for at least 3,000 years. This assertion and assessment here is that the ancient that ancient Kemet was a civilization that built itself on concepts from its past. The civilization itself can be compared to a great mansion built on a strong foundation that was modernized when necessary to accommodate its inhabitants. This said, the arguments presented here are built around aspects of this civilization's foundation and soul connection. And tools. I'm going to stop right here. So you guys have a good night, a good day, and be blessed. This is only part 1 of 5.